Well, let's cross now to San Francisco and speak to Tim O'Reilly. He's the founder of O'Reilly Media. Thanks very much for joining us and speaking to Al Jazeera. You know Steve Jobs personally. How hard do you think it was for him to decide to resign?
Well, I think he said it pretty straightforwardly. He's obviously in a position where he can't work full-time. And I also think it's time for his team at Apple to take the lead. You know, Steve is certainly the visionary and the driver and the man who has defined what Apple has become. But the products are created by the team that he has assembled. And I think he's just saying it's time for them to take the lead.
Where do you think this is going to leave Apple in the future without Steve Jobs at the helm?
Well, I think a lot of people look back to the last time Steve left the company in 1985. But you have to realize that back then he was ousted, and the people who were taking over the company were not following his lead. Now the people who are taking over the company are following in the footsteps of a man who has redefined the industry. And not just the people at Apple, but everybody across the entire computer industry is now shaping their products around the kind of vision and aesthetic that Steve Jobs brought to the table. You know, in a world in which consumer electronics, computers were increasingly driven by lowering cost, he reintroduced a design ethic and a design sensibility. He realized that people would pay for things that were beautiful. And in that pursuit of beauty, he created really a whole new vision for the industry as a whole. And that's not going away. This isn't Steve Jobs leaving in disgrace. This is Steve Jobs leaving at the top of his game with everybody at Apple and at every other company trying to follow in his footsteps.
Okay, we're seeing very clearly Apple is a creative company, but running a company isn't the same as creating the vision for it. Is Tim Cook up to the job?
Well, certainly Tim has been running the company for many practical purposes for quite some time. I think there's no question that Steve will be missed. He is a remarkable individual. I don't think you can point to anybody else in the computer industry who's had the kind of track record that he's had, where it's driven by his individual genius. But that being said, I think he's left Apple in a really strong position.
Okay, Tim, you know Steve Jobs personally. What kind of person is he on a personal level?
Well, you know, I have to say, I think you're overstating. I know him in a professional context. I don't know him well personally. I think certainly, you know, he's driven. He's a hard taskmaster. He's mercurial. He's somebody who has enormous passion. Anybody can see it. He takes no prisoners. I was at one meeting with him with the leadership team from another large company. And just the boldness with which he ripped into their product strategy. You know, he took no prisoners. He's uncompromising.
And in his resignation letter, Tim, Steve Jobs said he believes that Apple's brightest and most innovative days are ahead. Do you agree?
You know, it's impossible to say. I think there is no question but that the products that Apple has been bringing to the table have been developed by a team of people who are still at Apple. You know, Steve Jobs didn't develop the iPhone. It was developed by a team of brilliant, talented engineers and designers at Apple under the leadership of Jonathan Ive. Steve is the guiding spirit of the company. Steve is the guy who says, no, that's not good enough. Steve is the guy who pushes people. He sets the bar. But people will be trying to get over that bar long after Steve Jobs is no longer around at the company, because he has proven that his vision and his standards really matter. And I think the engineering talent that and the design talent that's there at Apple will continue to innovate for many years to come.